Permaculture really starts with an ethic, earth care. It's care of the whole systems of earth and the species. So we actually devise model systems. Much of the design is drawn from nature. The end result that we aim for is to produce a system that's ecologically sound and economically profitable. It can get as sophisticated or as simple as you like. Tasmania, if you find anybody else on a beach, you just go and find another beach. Oh, Daddy was a keeper of the Eddystone Light, played with a mermaid every night. They had children, 1, 2, 3, a porpoise and a herring, and the other was me. Yo ho ho, the wind blows free, oh, for a life on the rolling sea. I was born in Stanley in Tasmania 63 years ago. It's a cold climate, and all my ancestors had come from cold climates. And it was there that I developed the ideas which became permaculture. It's there that I built the first models, and from there that I teach around the world. I've been working for quite a long time in the rainforests of Tasmania, and I slowly began to realise that their production could be far higher than that of any system that we had devised, and it was from there that permaculture grew. It was putting a knowledge of the relationships between the plants and the animals into the situation of farming or food production. By 1978, the gardens that we'd constructed had given us confidence that we could create forest systems which were gardens. So I published a book then and 3 since. And then I started to teach in '81. That's just 10 years ago. And now those teachers are in their 5th generation. They're the students of my students of my students and so on. I often sit here at home thinking of them, and just occasionally I decide to go and have a look at what they're doing. I think I'll do that now and see you later. We're in the San Juan Islands, not far from the Canadian border. And these islands were heavily glaciated not so long ago in the Pleistocene. So they're very bare on top. Often they're made up of granites, unlike the mainland. And they have lakes and valleys and typical glacial landscapes. And we'll have a look at some of the action on the San Juans. One of my students was Joe Bullock. He's been developing a forest garden.
Hi, Bill.
Yeah, I'm good. It's about 6 years ago you and the boys bought this area.
Yeah, about 6 years.
When was I here? 5 years ago?
I think 4 or 5, something like that.
Well, things have changed, and you've had a long battle to find out what to do that works.
Still finding out, I think.
We're fortunate to be here on a fine summer's day, but here in winter it can get very cold, and heat is an invaluable resource.
It's nice, Joe.
Yeah. Joe has wisely combined his kitchen with a greenhouse. It not only heats his house, but provides him with winter food. But Joe's developed other techniques to make the greatest use of the scarce heat resource of this area.
Well, we've got a palm tree growing here, and if you just look at it, you might not think anything strange about that, but actually palm trees aren't too common around here, and we do get quite cold. We're just a few miles from the Canadian border, and we can get some really cold winds and heavy snowfalls in the winter occasionally. What I'd like to demonstrate here is a lot of people think of rocky land as being non-agricultural land, but actually one thing that rocky land also has in great abundance is an accumulation of heat. And in a relatively cool summer climate like this, heat is often one of the most precious commodities to the grower of many, many things. So I think people in England and Scotland have long known this by planting things up against rock walls. But if you have land with rocky outcroppings, one might consider placing a heat-loving species close to the rocks in order to benefit from the additional heat they would receive. Hard to say.
Joe and his brother Sam are putting in a 30-acre orchard, which will eventually become a food forest. As orchard plants can be expensive, Joe and his brothers have come up with some good ideas to use plants that already exist.
We're in the midst of a native crabapple thicket here. That's Malus fusca. It has a big range all over the northwest of the United States. Normally, it's not considered to have much value to most people, although it was utilized by the Native Americans. However, I've found that you can graft the smaller trees. This tree is growing on a rocky, dry ridge, and it's never received any care from us except for the initial graft. As you can see, it's healed up real nice. Now, there's quite a difference in the two foliages of these two types, and if you look at it, the smaller leaf here with a cut edge would be typical of the wild tree, and this bigger, broader leaf is the grafted apple tree. It's thriving, and this year, for the first time, it has some fruit on it. This variety is called Irish Peach, and what's even better, they're really good. I do this with a native species we have here, but it could probably be done with any type of wild apple occurring anywhere.
Developing such a complex property can be a lot of work. You have to fertilize and weed and mulch. So they've employed a large labor force to help.
Ah, a duck tractor.
The ducks do the job of a tractor in their digging, fertilizing and weeding. And not only that, the brothers enjoy the duck eggs.
We all thought that chicken tractoring would be the way to go with some of these wet, fertile, fast-growing bottomlands. And we did a little with chickens, but we come to the conclusion that ducks are just a lot nicer animals to be around, nicer personalities. So chickens are good because they scratch things up, but in terms of being around one or the other, we prefer ducks.
And another good thing about ducks is if they do escape, they're not quite as voracious when they get into the garden. Chickens, they quickly find your mulch. So
yeah, they're mulch lovers.
Yeah. Ducks are real fun to watch, and their families and the way they cohabitate with each other.
Yeah.
Poultry, ducks and geese can be an important part of any design. About 30 miles away from Joe's place in the Skagit Valley, I visited a farm and nursery where geese are employed by an old friend of mine, Ann Swartz.
These are white Chinese geese, and they eat all the grass species, they eat legumes, they eat chickweed.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I couldn't farm without them.
You mean you eat them?
Sometimes. Right about this time of the year when I don't want to feed them all winter long.
So mainly they're used here for weeding?
I have 1.5 acres of potatoes, and they did all my weeding for me in the potatoes.
Right.
Field is spotless. They did a really wonderful job. We mulch all the beds with the compost, and then the geese come in and eat all the other grasses and weeds, and every once in a while I'll come in with a mower, but by and large the geese eat everything.
So they're your main workers in your vineyard?
In the nursery stock, in the raspberries, potatoes, strawberries. And I use a very portable fence, and so wherever I want the geese, I just herd them around.
Ann's also trained her dogs to get rid of the overgrown zucchinis, which are a problem for all home gardeners. Like most permaculture farmers, Ann's producing far more than she can use, so she has joined other local growers who have adopted a good strategy to sell their surplus product.
Cascadian Farm buys strawberries and raspberries and several other kinds of fruit from probably better than 60 growers at this point. Hi, Simon. Simon, are you here?
Yeah, Ann.
Hi, how are you today?
Good morning.
I got 18 flats and about 350 pounds for you today.
Great, come on up.
Cascadians always try to pay a good bonus for organic fruit, and they've been more than willing to work with small growers, learning how best to meet the market. No, the quality's good and the flavor's good. Can never get enough pickers, but what else is new? So it's been very beneficial to advance the profitability of small farms, but everything is packed and labeled under the Cascadian Farm label.
These are the subboreal or far north forests just below the high northern latitude of 45 degrees. We're just north of the oaks on the coast and just south of the purely coniferous forests. It's noticeable here, as it is with all forests, that the forest depends on a fallen forest to grow itself, so that every log and every stump here, many of them are cut-off stumps, have cedar trees growing in them and berry bushes. And all these forests are the same, no matter whether they're northern or southern latitude. And then the main foods out of this forest for people and for a lot of animals are sugars, which are stored in the maples and the saps of many of the deciduous trees, and fungi. And there are at least 40 species of fungi. This one looks as though it might make you hallucinate, but there are at least 40 edible species of fungi throughout the forest. So you'll find many of the animals are full of fungi in the winter, and of course the people eat fungi in the winter. And the Indians cleared holes in this forest and cultivated nettles. And from nettles they made very fine silky cloth, and they also ate, the nettle was a green vegetable.
We're in England, in Shropshire, on Roman Bank, and it's autumn, or early winter, really. And we've come to meet Robert Hart, who's developed a forest garden here over the last few years.
Robert.
Pleased to meet you.
After a long time.
Yes, after a very long time, nearly 12 years.
Will we have a look at this garden?
Right, grand.
Great.
Glad to see you.
This garden is one of the oldest examples in Europe of how to go about consciously designing a forest garden.
So this is my favorite fruit, actually.
This one is.
I consider this as nice as any tropical fruit. This is a universal pollinator. It's a golden hornet crab, which will pollinate any kind of ordinary apple.
Great, that's a useful thing.
A very useful thing indeed.
Yeah. Production of the temperate areas, because it is soft light, is much greater than the tropics.
Is it?
It is, and the day length is much longer, as you realise.
A cool area forest with clearings has a very complex series of levels, and this garden imitates that very well.
And that's basically, you know, the structure of the whole system. How many levels do you think?
I reckon there are 7 layers. There's the high tree layer of trees that require light. This is an old pear tree that was planted 30 years ago, so that constitutes the canopy. Then there's the low tree layer. That is an apple on dwarfing rootstock, a shade-tolerant apple. Then there's the shrub layer. This is a red currant bush. Then this is the herbaceous layer comprising apple mint. And this is the ground cover layer. That is a strawberry raspberry, a plant that spreads horizontally. Then there's the root layer, comprising plants that are grown for their roots alone. And then there's the vertical layer of climbers, like raspberries and loganberries. Many of the herbs are fragrant herbs. Everyone knows that lavender, for instance, wards off clothes moths. And it's reasonable to suppose that aromatic herbs of that kind also ward off pests and diseases from neighboring plants.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it? I mean, you get quite a lot of stuff in total.
These gardens show the efficiency and stability of a forest but was much better than the production of a monoculture farm. So between the tropics and the temperate areas, we use the same sort of principles both ways.
Absolutely, yes, yes.